Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to Let's Have Renaissance, a podcast about writing, editing, publishing, literature, the arts, and more. I am Ito Otini.
And I'm Micaiah Otini, and today we're speaking with Timothy Nolan. Timothy is an award-winning playwright, screenwriter, actor, and educator. He earned his MFA in playwriting at Pace University and has been named an Indie Theater New Person of the Year. He now lives in Brooklyn with his wife, screenwriter Susannah Nolan. We're excited to be with him today.
Thank you for tuning in. We're excited that you're here. Why don't you also subscribe, like, comment, and share this episode with your friends?
And if you know anyone who wants to come on the podcast, please do send them our way. Also, if you haven't yet, sign up for our newsletter where we share updates, resources, and opportunities at thedatekeepers.com.
Timothy, thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to have you. Can you please tell us about yourself?
Thank you for having me. I am a playwright and an actor. I've also lately been doing some screenplay work.
Which one is your favorite, acting or playwriting?
Well, the acting is relatively new. So I think the playwriting is still somewhat closer to my heart, but I do really enjoy the acting. What happened was I was accepted. I had wanted to go get my MFA, and I was accepted into the Actors Studio Drama School at Pace. They have a terrific playwriting program, but it's also a requirement that you take acting classes. And actually, the acting classes turned out to be like terrific writing classes in terms of developing a character and getting really specific and knowing everything you have to know about your story and about who's telling it. And I was lucky. I had two terrific acting teachers who are well known here in New York, Susan Aston and Jacqueline Knapp. And, I used to remark to Miss Aston that her acting class was maybe the best writing class I ever took. So initially it was like, all right, I'll keep studying acting and taking acting things because it makes the writing better. But, I really enjoy it. And we do kind of feed each other back and forth. But the writing is the thing that I've done most of my life.
What do you write about?
When I first started out, when I was younger, I used to want to write very social/political plays, kind of like change the world kind of stuff. And as I got older, that kind of changed because the older you get, the more aware you become of like these strange life situations that people find themselves in from time to time. Things happen that are unexpected and challenge them in some way. And so I started gravitating more towards those types of stories. I had another teacher who said that one of the things the theater does better than anyone else is ghosts. So I have a lot of ghosts in my stories, usually one or two per tale. If you think about like who you are as a person, whoever you are, you're kind of a collection of all the other people who you encountered. And some of those people are still with us and some of them are not. But then again, the ones that are not still kind of are because they're there as part of you. So it was easy to translate that into manifesting them on stage, even though they're not like, I used to say they're living, breathing ghosts. They're as real as anything else, and they may not walk the earth with the rest of us. They may not be visible to the rest of us, but they're there. And I used to imagine no matter what was going on, I would hear my dad's voice. Even when he was alive, I'd go in, and usually scarily accurate. So, like I said, it was just sort of an extension from there into how do I write this down? I had a scene in a play where a young man walks into a bar here in Brooklyn in like the 50s. He's a young man. He walks into a bar and he has an imagined conversation with his father in which his father tells him that he's proud of him and buys him a beer and introduces him to the whole room, and they sing a song and all of this. And then when that's done, first he walks in the bar, he goes, "Hi, Pop," and then the scene starts. And then he finishes singing, and he looks at him, and he goes, "Hi, Pop," and his father kind of grumbles, "What the hell are you doing in here?" So, like, he has this whole lovely imaginary scene where he's connecting with his father, and then he has the real-life scene, which is, somewhat different, so.
And how do you define a ghost?
I actually was reading a part once and I knew the character was a ghost. And I asked the writer, I said, is he a ghost or is he a memory? And they were like, well, what's the difference? And I'm like, a ghost is free thinking, free spirited, its own person. A memory is limited because it grows out of the mind of another character. So I was like, if he's like a free agent, if he has intent and is thinking, then you play him one way. The character is just remembering this thing and then we see it. Then you're playing out something that's in someone else's memory, and that's fine, but it's a different animal. You need to set up your rules, like who can see this ghost and how do they interact. And then you just really, really need to know what was the relationship between the figure who is now the ghost and the figure who is still walking the earth. And then everything kind of grows out of that. I mean, honestly, one of the things I learned in, doing some acting as a writer is the more specific you can get with every character, the stronger the story is going to be. So you want to, really drill down. I have a play, which we just did at the Actors Studio called Belubaland. And the central action is a woman is visited by the ghost of her grandfather, who she's never met. And she has to go to Ireland to settle his affairs to save his soul, essentially. So a lot of the pre-work before I actually scripted anything was in nailing down her relationship to him, her relationship to her father, because it was her father's father. What was their relationship like, the father and the grandfather? And about 95% of that stuff we'll never see the script. But it's really important because it affects everything. When you're talking to your wife or talking to your husband, even the simplest thing like, what do you want for dinner, is colored by all the times that you've spent together and the ways you can sort of predict what the other person is saying, which in the end of the day tells the audience everything they need to know, or a lot of what they need to know about that particular character and the relationship they have to other characters. It also gives the actor a lot of stuff to chew on too. And, they are really allowed to bring a lot of their own energy and their own thoughts to it, which only benefits the process. When I started out, I used to think like, well, I have to make my script actor proof, because it's like, well, I don't want the actors like coming up with stuff. And then I realized that that was exactly the wrong way to be looking at this. You really want actors to read your script and then get a vibe on the character and then bring their own stuff to it, stuff that you never thought of. And then after that, best idea wins. And that's how these plays develop.
And I think there's a lot in what you said earlier about setting up the rules. One of the scariest things you can do to your characters or to your audience is to set up the rules and everyone knows them. And then something happens that violates those rules.
Mm-hmm.
And that only works if you set the rules up well. But that's what's scary about ghosts in the first place. They're not all malevolent, but they're scary because they're violating a rule. Death is the end. But then it's not. And that's also what's scary in life. You were talking about the conventions that emerge when couples are talking to each other. There's nothing more terrifying than when you're talking to someone you think you know and the rules start to change. I don't know if you would classify your ghost stories as horror, but I think a lot of the best horror sets up the rules and then subtly undermines what the reader thinks they know. And it takes a finesse because you can't just throw out the whole structure. Otherwise, the reader loses trust. But how do you know when to break the rules and to what degree and how much is too much?
Well, I think your characters tell you that, specifically the ghost character or whatever. They'll tell you, I have to take this extreme action to, accomplish what I want to accomplish. Again, you know who they are, you know what they are, you know their background, you know this, that, and the other thing. And then it just suddenly becomes like, well, what if the character just did this and violated the rules? And if there was like a consequence to that, say a ghost comes back to Earth as a living person, well, what does that do to them? I explored this in another play, which took place in a cemetery, and it was 8 women, and 4 of them were residents of the cemetery, and 2 of them have to come back to Earth. I sat with the 2 actors who were playing them, and we were like, these people haven't experienced their senses in years, in hundreds of years. So what is that like? And all of a sudden they transport themselves back to, say, a modern city. Have they ever heard a car horn? Do they know what an airplane is or sounds like or anything like that? They come back and they're just like this assault on their senses, which have been so dormant for so long. They get their focus back just enough to do what they do and then get back, because if they stay there much longer, they'll go insane. So your characters can tell you what the consequences will be and what they're willing to risk.
How did you come up with that? Was it like, did you grow up reading about ghosts, or?
I think it came up, I hit a certain age, when I was lucky enough to be a grown adult and then eventually, get married and have a child while my parents were still alive. And my grandparents, who we were very close to growing up, were still alive. And then you kind of hit an age where it felt like every year or, year and a half or so, one of them dropped off the board. There's the loss, there's the sadness, there's the mourning. And then you kind of wake up and think like, in this same play, it was called Mighty Good Company, and it was set in the cemetery, and they're trying to explain the importance of remembering the ancestors. And they look at the plot of land and they say, this is where the time without them began. That was essentially what it is. Like, I'm now going to live the rest of my life in the time without them. And then you sit there and think, like, are there souls somewhere? Can I, in my imagination, reach across the boundary and see where they're at? Which I don't think I could have done had I not experienced that.
Do you agree with the comment that the theater makes use of ghosts better than any other art form? And if so, why do you think that?
I do agree with it. And I've actually had this discussion with colleagues. One of them said to me, it was kind of nice. He said, you're a true man of the theater because you use your ghosts. And I was like, yeah, well, it's because it's the best use of them. I think it's just, there's only so much you can do to portray a ghost in a live play. The actor is a corporeal presence, even if they're playing someone who isn't. So we're talking about the rules a second ago. It allows you to set those rules very quickly because you can set them visually. And anytime you can do it visually, your eye and your senses will make all the connections you need before your brain has a chance to do the math. So that will happen. And then you also, because they're right there in the room and someone else is experiencing them, you believe it. You believe that they're there. You believe that this person has 3 days to get her grandfather's affairs in order, or the grandfather is going to wander in limbo or purgatory for eternity. So she needs to save him from that. You can set that up and then you can see it through the character's eyes, which I find is much more powerful than, say, if you were doing it in a film and someone said, oh, well, we'll make him a hologram or something. It's like, okay, there's certainly a way to do that and there's a way to do it well. But I would think it would lose some of its power, which is not to say you just can't have a person staring off into the direction of the screen and describing what they say, but you can do that in a play because you're right there with the person and the person is looking out and seeing oh, I see this, oh, I see that. And you feel like you're there with them. So it becomes a very primal thing and it's very easy to buy into. And once you buy into it, then you're along for the story and you're like, oh my God, he can't just wander the earth for eternity. They got to get this stuff straightened out.
Who are your favorite ghosts in theater history?
Ooh, good question. Oh, gosh. I got a lot of inspiration from Our Town, Thornton Wilder. The third act of Our Town takes place in a cemetery. It was sort of the inspiration for this play I was just describing. It's basically a bunch of people sitting in straight back chairs, staring straight ahead, just having these sort of stilted conversations. And it's all done very simply. There's not a lot of ooh or anything like that. It's just presented as this is their plight. And then the one character joins them and she doesn't want to be there. And again, a rule is broken. They allow her to go back and it becomes too overwhelming. And then she eventually settles into her chair, as it were, which symbolically is her grave. We were talking a second ago about the power of seeing a ghost on stage. That to me was really the inspiration for that and the illustration of just how powerful it can be.
And do you have anything else that you would like to mention?
Well, I have one play which I was going to read from. It's called Stuck with Fred, which last year was published by Next Stage Press. Again, a ghost story. A woman is telling this story about a friend of hers. They met in an AA meeting and he was much older and he's completely irascible and completely unpredictable and, a bit of a loose cannon and abusive at times verbally. And then little by little it comes out that she's standing at his grave and is recalling all these times. And because he had encouraged her or she found inspiration from their friendship to accomplish this goal, she had sort of given up on being a writer and she sort of reignited it and was starting to get successful. But as a result, she wasn't there when he died and she wasn't there when they buried him. So she goes to the grave to get the stuff straightened out.
Would you like to read from your part?
Sure. Yeah. I'm going to do a little gender bending here because I'm going to read the character of Hilly, who is the woman I was just describing. She's speaking to Fred, her friend, recalling one of their last conversations when he's been asking her to read something from the book. And so finally she breaks down and she starts to read it, which sort of describes their friendship and the theme of the play. And this is Hilly. I would go to meetings and think, Jesus Christ, if I end up like the people in this room, I'm going to peel off my own skin. And I guess that's exactly what I ended up doing. See, people think what puts them together is that they both like football or art house films or running or ballroom dancing or whatever weird thing they like. But it's cheap. You can always find those people. They're fun for a little while. They come and go. You know what really holds people together? Whatever it is that pulls them apart. Whatever you can't overcome. Whatever it is that makes you want to cry and bang the walls with your fists when you look in the mirror. That's what ties us to someone else. Whatever it is that makes up the walls of the prison cell of your life. Because then another prisoner in another cell knocks on your wall. The wall is separating you, but it's also connecting you. I knew there were parts of you that would never heal, but I almost didn't want them to because those were the parts that held us together. They were our wall of connection. In school, when we studied Plato, he called it a metaxu, the between, a separation that's also a connection, a block that's also a bridge. And if you see the metaxu in someone else, you can see it in yourself. And then you have the bridge. People build towers to get closer to God, but that's not what does it. It's the bridge that brings you closer to God. A bridge, and then another bridge, and then another bridge. And that's how we get there. We're our metaxu. All the things that make us so effed up. All our stuff that walls us off from the rest of the world. That's what brought us together. That's why I'm here. I mean, who else would put up with all your stuff but someone with an equal amount of their own stuff? That's why you're so precious to me, Fred.
I love that.
I love it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much, guys. This has been a lot of fun.